So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over Joe Drammissi.
All right, well, great. Well, thanks for having me on, Mike. So yeah, talking about just instructor type stuff and instructor background. My background is a bit different from the typical firearms instructor that we have out there that you run into. I'm not a retired Navy SEAL. I'm not retired law enforcement. I don't have that kind of background. I'm not a kung fu master or a mixed martial artist. Um, my background's a little bit different, as I was an instructor first and then a firearms person afterwards. So the way my approach to things is a little bit different. And starting out as I've been teaching adults probably for 20 years or so now. Um, and my field was engineering and project management and that kind of stuff. Um, but the way I got into teaching basically was, I'd wanted to do that, and I got the opportunity when I was at UCSD taking some classes. A mentor that I had there said, "Hey, do you want to teach?" And I said, "Yeah." And there was an opening there in that project management area, so he got me in there. And when I started, I was terrible. I was an awful instructor at first class or two, but I'm an outstanding instructor now. But getting into it that way gave me just a different perspective because one of the things that I look at when I teach is my whole idea is to get information out to people basically, and getting getting the right information out to people, I think, is a really important thing. And one of the things that motivates me when I teach is that I know if I'm talking to a group of people, and I'm not going to reach everybody, but everybody will more or less enjoy it because I'm a pretty good speaker and I try to talk about interesting things. Um, but I know that there will be one or two people in the room that I actually reach and make a difference with and cause them to do something that actually has a significant impact on their life, basically. And that's kind of what drew me to it, because that's what happened to me. There was a class that I was in at UCSD, and there was an instructor, a guy named Greg Goetz, and one of the things, just an outstanding instructor, and he was a mentor of mine for a long time. But one of the things that he would do is he would bring a bunch of books into class, and he would line them up in front on the whiteboard. And one of the books was The Art of Possibility by Ben Zander. And for me, that was a life-changing book. And that was one of the things that got me out of that corporate environment that I was in and got me into teaching full time. And so I always look back on, that one instructor and that one book had that kind of impact on me. So I know that when I speak to a group, before I got into the firearm stuff, when I was doing a lot of conferences and speaking events and classes, related to the project management stuff, I know that I would have that effect on one or two people in the room every time I spoke, and that was a really motivating thing. So transitioning that into the firearm stuff, it's it's the same kind of thing. It's I know I'm not reaching everybody in the class, but hopefully something that I say, will resonate with one or two of the people, and it'll have a maybe life-changing effect. It may even, for what we do, it may even save their lives. Um, so that's kind of the approach that I take with it. So teaching the firearm stuff, I was fortunate. That came up, and feel free to jump in here, Michael. um, but I was fortunate that I've been working with or teaching with Bill Desy at CCWUSA, and been teaching with him now for about 3.5 years, and that's been just a fantastic experience. I've learned more in 3.5 years, I think, teaching with Bill probably than I would have learned with 10 years with somebody else. I mean, he's just a phenomenal instructor. And the approach that I take with that is the same kind of approach that I've always talked about or always looked at with teaching. And it's we teach the concealed carry qualification classes each week, and kind of the approach that I look at, the part of the class that I focus on more, or that I teach more, is the situational awareness part of it, and the idea of staying out of situations where you actually would have to use the gun to protect yourself or defend yourself. Because what I'll tell students is, if you have to use a firearm to save yourself or to defend yourself, probably the only good thing that comes out of that is that you didn't get shot, or somebody you care about didn't get shot. Everything else that is involved there is bad. From the psychological burden of having to shoot someone or kill someone, you're gonna have to live with that. The financial impact that you're going to have, the legal impact, the social impact. You're going to lose family, you're going to lose friends. Um, you could eventually lose your freedom. I mean, there's really nothing good that comes out of that. So, my focus is to pay attention and try to avoid getting into that kind of a situation. So that's kind of the approach that I take. The firearms, the shooting part of it is, it's something we do. And one of the things I like about Bill's approach to it is, if you look at the qualification, the actual shooting part for your concealed carry, the bar is pretty low. I mean, they're not requiring you to do a lot, and there's some people that struggle with it. But the actual shooting qual is not really not that challenging. What I like about Bill's approach, and one of the reasons I've learned quite a bit with him, is he does a little bit more in terms of the shooting than just the shooting qual. Like, I've heard, talking to other people and other instructors, a lot of instructors will just run students through the qualification that they have to do. And then that's it. What Bill likes to do is try to work with them and try to improve their shooting, try to fix some of the things. A lot of them, have issues with just fundamental stuff, grip, sight picture, trigger press. And we work with students that way. And that's, I think, a really good way to address it. Because getting back to the situational part of it, when I'm talking to students, one of the things I'll ask students in class is, how many of them practice drawing from concealment, for instance. Okay, you're a concealed carrier. And in our classes, typically we'll have like 15 people there. And roughly half of them will be renewals, half of them will be initial permit people. And I'll ask that question, how many people, practice drawing from concealment? And I might get maybe 4 or 5 people out of 15 might say they practice. And then if I ask the second question, if I say, well, how many of you know your draw to first shot time? And maybe one or two. And these are people, with the renewals, these are people who've been carrying for 2 years, at least 2 years, and don't practice drawing from concealment, or don't know what their draw to first shot time is. And and I'll point out to them, it doesn't matter what the time is. I mean, people like John Correa will say, you should be shooting for about a second and a half draw to first shot time. And if you can do that, great. But it doesn't really matter what your time is. If your time's 3 or 4 seconds, it doesn't matter so much. What matters is what your time is. Because if you're ever in a situation and you ever have to do that, you need to know what you can do and what you can't do. What Clint Eastwood said, a man's got to know his limitations. If you're ever in a situation like that where there is an armed person, they're waving a gun around, if they turn away from you and point the gun at somebody else for a few seconds, you have to know, okay, do you have the skills? Can you draw and get your gun into play at that point? Or is that beyond your skills? So, thinking about that kind of stuff and approaching things that way is how I like to look at that basically that kind of stuff, or my approach to teaching like that. So we do a lot of that in the concealed carry classes and the qualification classes. The other thing, just along those lines, probably about 2 years ago or so, another class I developed after having this experience is, I developed a what I call the next steps class, concealed carry next steps class. Because what we were seeing in the qualification classes is, we're starting to see a lot of people that were getting their concealed carry for the first time. Um, and a lot of times these people didn't know anyone else who carried. They were the only ones that they knew who carried. So where do you learn about a lot of other basic stuff? Like where do you learn about holsters, about gun belts, about carrying with a round in the chamber, about dressing around the gun? Um, how do you deal with people that ask you, well, why do you feel like you have to have a gun? What are you afraid of? You know, all that kind of stuff. Because sometimes as instructors or people that are immersed in this, like Michael or Bill and all most of the other people I run into, you know, we're immersed in this stuff. We talk to people every day that carry, that teach, that know this, that know that. So we're always hearing this kind of stuff. But for I noticed there's a lot of people that really they're the only ones they knew that carry. So who do they talk to? So I created a little 4-hour class that went through that stuff. I bring a box of holsters with me, you know, because I'll explain to people everybody goes through a box of holsters. Everybody eventually develops a box of holsters because you know, as most people that have done this for a while know that holsters are a very personal thing. And it's hard to find the one that actually works well for you. You could watch YouTube videos and you watch reviews and this holster looks great, and then you buy it and nah, it's not great. Because it's the holsters are very unique. It depends on your body type, it depends on the kind of gun you're carrying, where on your body you're carrying it. And learning all that stuff is challenging if you're the only one you know that carries. Because I'll have people in class sometimes that'll say they don't carry all the time because it's uncomfortable, or they drive a lot and the holster's uncomfortable. And you know what I'll tell them is, you know, if your holster's uncomfortable, it's you know it's either the wrong holster for you, or you're carrying the wrong gun, or it's in the wrong place on your body, or some combination of those three things. But you know, you get the right holster and you get everything dialed in, you shouldn't feel it at all. You know, I'll drive all the way out to Prescott. I'll drive for 6 hours with my inside the waistband holster, and I don't even feel it. But it took a whole box of holsters to get to that level. So, you know, creating this other class again to help people. And that's the whole idea. You know, my approach to all this is getting information out to people. And so created that class. And then along with that class is, you know, I also created a 2-hour pepper spray and situational awareness class. So again, probably an hour and a half of that class is the situational awareness part where we or where I talk about just avoiding getting into situations where you might have to use that pepper spray, you know, to break contact and get away. And then the last half hour is the pepper spray part. So, and I, you know, the reason I came up with that class too is a lot of us carry, you know, that carry concealed carry pepper spray as well, because you know, very few problems are gun problems. Lots of problems are pepper spray problems. So carrying pepper spray gives you it gives you something between not being able to do anything and having to shoot someone. So you know, a lot of us carry pepper spray. The other thing too that I'll tell students in class when I talk about these classes, because I'll when I teach the CCW qualification classes, I'll also tell students about the next steps class and the pepper spray class. And the other thing I'll mention is, you know, guns aren't for everybody. You know, you may have a spouse or family members or children that, you know, okay, a gun's not right for them. So pepper spray at least gives them something. So we kind of talk about that kind of stuff. And it's interesting because that actually all that stuff came in handy now because what we were doing was I was teaching those classes maybe one Saturday a month, and then teaching the concealed carry classes the other 3 weekends. And with the law changes with SB2, where they've changed the requirement now for the initial concealed carry license. They've changed it from 8 hours of training to 16 hours of training. And they've changed the renewal from 4 hours to 8 hours. And a lot of the instructors, I think, are kind of scrambling a little bit now to figure out, okay, I've got to add 8 more hours of content to this stuff. And we're just now starting to see people that are falling under the 16-hour rule. I've got students on the 17th. I think I've got 8 students in class now that are under the 16-hour rule. And what we've been able to do at CCWUSA, what I've done is I've taken the material that I was using for the next steps class, and I've pulled in some of the situational awareness stuff from the pepper spray class, and then adding about 45 minutes or so of the mental health thing that the state is now forcing us to talk about. And so now I've got a second day of material. So this is working out well for us because now we've got 2 days now to offer for the people that need the 16-hour stuff. So all that stuff's come in pretty handy. So so anyway, that's kind of the approach that I take to the training stuff. Um, Other things, that goes along with the training, I was talking about getting the word out to people because I think that's a lot of a big part of the reason. That's why, my approach to training is a little bit different because of my background is a little bit different. Getting involved with San Diego County gun owners and doing the activist stuff, again, gives me um, a different approach to the training stuff than a lot of trainers have because of my this unique kind of background. Um, and one of the things I do a lot of is I write a lot of articles. And as part of San Diego County Gun Owners, I started their blog page, got that going, and I was publishing articles on there every week for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, something like that. I still publish on there, but I also write on Substack at getagrip.substack.com. And the whole idea of that stuff is getting information out to people. Because a lot of people, I think, are at least misinformed, if not completely uninformed about gun related stuff. And one of the reasons, and that includes gun owners as well. And I think one of the reasons that we have the problems that we have now with the anti-gun forces that are out there is because for probably the last 50 years, gun owners really did not step up and say anything or do anything. We've allowed the other side to just run with it. And so now we're at a point where we're having these arguments trying to defend these rights. And, we really shouldn't have to be doing that stuff now. This should not be something that we have to argue about right now. But again, we kind of created that. And a big part of it is, the information related stuff. So that's why, when I write these articles every week and publish these articles, a big part of that or a big reason for that is to try to get information out to people. I'm trying to inspire people to think about things and maybe not take my word for it, but I usually have links in my articles to where the sources that I'm looking at, so that I encourage people to check them out and form their own opinions and find out stuff, because there's a lot of things going on out there, and it's really kind of a critical point in our history right now with just the things that are going on, like the current administration is kind of an anti-gun administration. If this continues in November, chances are it's going to get tough for gun owners in the country. And it's interesting because, most people in the country don't feel that way. Most people are pro Second Amendment and pro guns. It's hard to see that because of the media and because of different things that go on. But like I was just reading today in an article where they were saying that we've just hit the 60th consecutive month of over 1 million background checks for gun purchases. So that means for 60 months since back sometime, I think it was in 2019, was the last time it was under 1 million. So that's what's going on in the country. So firearms are a part of our culture, a part of our history. It's just you do have to stand up and fight for this kind of stuff. So that's part of what I do. And trying to get this information out is trying to get people to take a look at things and to think about these things and form their own opinions and get involved. It's interesting because when I teach the concealed carry classes, I'll take about 15 minutes and talk about San Diego County gun owners. And it's interesting to me because I'll ask, when I start, I'll ask, well, how many of you have heard of San Diego County gun owners? And again, out of 15 people, maybe 5 or 6 typically have heard of San Diego County gun owners, which to me is interesting because we're the whole reason that they're there in the first place. Because, I'll explain to them that, well, you could not get a concealed carry license in San Diego County until, basically Michael Schwartz started San Diego County gun owners and decided that we were going to do that as one of our first things was to get our concealed carry rights back. And, I've got people there that aren't aware of that. And something that's even more surprising to me, as part of that talk, I'll ask them, how many of you are familiar with SB2? And now these are people that are, that have spent a year applying and going through all the stuff to get their concealed carry license. Half of the people there are renewing, so they've been carrying for at least 2 years. And again, if I ask them about SB2, usually about half of them have never heard of it. So, here's a group of people that I ask them about SB2, they've never heard of that. Yet, if SB2 is implemented, it completely wipes out everything they're trying to do. There won't be any concealed carry. And and that's what I talk about or that's what I mean when I'm talking about getting information out to people. Because if people understood this kind of stuff, they would behave a little bit differently. I think they'd get a little more involved, a little more active. But again, a lot of people don't have that information. So, like I was saying, a big part of how I approach teaching is to get information out to people and to kind of encourage them to explore things and to look at things and to try to learn and reach some of their own conclusions, make some of their own decisions. So I think with that kind of background, it gives me just kind of a different perspective in how I approach training and how I approach teaching. And even that along those lines too is encouraging people to train, because that's another thing that we see with people that are carrying. One of the things that I'll try to encourage them to do is embrace what I call the concealed carry lifestyle, right? What I'll tell people is, okay, if you're getting this concealed carry license, what you should do is, you should carry whenever and wherever it's legal for you to carry. People that are getting a concealed carry and their plan is, they're going to carry the gun a couple of times a year when they go visit their brother-in-law because he lives in a sketchy neighborhood or something. I'll tell those people you're better off, not doing it. Buy pepper spray or something like that. Um, because there's a big component of this is training, really. And I have friends that, that own firearms that some of them carry, some of them don't carry. They just have the firearm for personal protection, say at home. But they haven't shot the gun in a year. And, people that if you think you're going to pick up that gun and actually defend yourself against somebody that's trying to kill you, and you haven't shot the gun in a year, your chances of being successful, I think, are pretty slim. You're much more likely to induce a malfunction. You're much more likely not to know what to do when that malfunction happens, just because you don't shoot or you don't train. And that's why we talk about the importance of training. Again, when I'm teaching, that's why I'm saying I bring in a bunch of different aspects to it that maybe some other trainers don't think about as much. I really emphasize trying to talk people into taking this seriously and getting training, especially with the concealed carry, because you're going to be carrying a loaded firearm around with you in public, hopefully regularly. You should train about with you should train regularly. And as we were talking about before the show started, I was talking with Michael, and there is a lot of training available in the San Diego area. It's not necessarily easy to find, but there's a lot of really good trainers, a lot of really good classes out here. And I try to lead by example, right? So I try to train pretty regularly. I'll tell the class, like, I'm taking a force on force training with Tactical Hive here, I think in September. Um, I'm going back out to Ghost Ring Tactical in New Mexico in October for another 4-day class. So I try to encourage people to train and learn things, because some of the benefits of training, aside from just learning how to be able to use the gun, if you ever get into that situation where you have to, training for that kind of stuff. But the other aspect of the training is the training can help you if you ever are in a situation like that and you end up going to court and you have to explain, say, to a jury that probably is not a jury of your peers, probably not a whole lot of gun owners or concealed carriers on the jury. But you're going to have to explain to that jury, or your legal team is going to have to explain to them why whatever you did was reasonable for a person in your situation, knowing what you knew at the time. So what I try to, show students is that the more regularly you train, the more you can come back and use that information maybe to show why what you did was reasonable. The example I'll use sometimes in class is like the 21-foot rule, for instance. So I'll just explain this example and then we'll break for some questions here. But some people aren't familiar with that, the Tooler rule. And I'll explain who Dennis Tooler was, and basically that, he was training police officers in Salt Lake City, and one of the officers asked him, how close do I need to let someone get to me with a knife before I'd be justified in drawing my handgun? And Tooler said, well, he didn't know. So they started experimenting and playing around with it. And what they discovered was it takes the average officer about a second and a half to draw his gun and get a shot on target. And the average adult can cover about 21 feet in about a second and a half. So from that came the Tooler principle. So, knowing that from training, you could use that to justify why, if someone was threatening you with a knife from 20 feet away and they started coming at you, it was reasonable for you to draw and shoot because you know how long it takes you to draw and shoot. You know how much distance they can cover in that time. And that's what you did. So you could use your training to help, show why what you did was reasonable. And one last thing, I've been talking about that for years. And when I was out in New Mexico training at the first part of this class, in May, I think we were out there. They actually made us run that, and I'd never run it before. I'd been talking about it, I was aware of it, but I'd never run it. And what they did is they had someone start about 21 feet away with a big rubber knife. They had us draw an airsoft gun. So they started at the same time. When that person with the knife started running toward us, we could draw and shoot. And what we found out was, yeah, you can get shots on them, but they probably get within 5 or 6 feet of you before the first shot hits them. So if that was real, even with a real gun and a real knife, you're going to get stabbed, you're going to get sliced up. And it was very illuminating. But that's, I mean, some of the benefits and the power of training. So I always try to encourage people to train regularly. So I can go on for hours, but with that, Michael, you had some questions out there, you said?
Yeah, cool. Great talk. Appreciate it. Excellent job. I had a question myself, and then I have some folks who have questions. I'll read them off to you. Um, what is a common mistake that experienced shooters need to work on?
So, in terms of accuracy, in terms of speed, in terms of what exactly?
Just generally, obviously, I think new shooters, it's obvious they kind of need to work on everything. They need to work on
Uh,
being less afraid of the gun. They need to be working on accuracy, that sort of thing. But what about the person who's owned a gun for 10 years? They've taken a couple of classes. They show up at your class to maybe renew their CCW. What's something that an intermediate person makes the mistake with? Are they overconfident? Do they mash the trigger more than newbies? Or
it's interesting that you would say that, because one of the things, and this is really weird, you wouldn't think it would be this way, but one of the things that I notice is when we have issues with gun handling, in terms of safe gun handling, a lot of times it will be people that tell us, I've been shooting for 30 years and I this or that. And then, they get out there and just the way they're manipulating the gun is alarming sometimes. And that, to me, that's one of the biggest surprises that I see. It's people that, okay, you tell me you've been shooting for 30 years, so you should know that part of it. And no, they don't really. And I think part of that is depending on what kind of shooting you did. If you're going to the desert and plinking, if you're not really taking classes, there was really no instructor to point out to you, hey, you shouldn't do that, or this is a bad mistake. You'll see people, for instance, coming in and out of a holster where they'll use their other hand, their support hand, and they'll cover their support hand. Not so much coming out of the holster, but going back into the holster. There's a tendency to go over and play with the holster and move it around, and they'll cover their hand while they're putting the holster or the gun back into the holster. You'll see people that have been doing it for a while, kind of pulling the gun out and not getting a good grip and coming right out on a draw. they'll come out and they'll play with the gun, they'll move it around, they'll do this, they'll do that. So that's one of the uh things that I see with people that say they've been shooting for a long time. They just you've been shooting for a long time, but you've been shooting once a year for a long time. Is That's kind of what I see with that.
Well, it sounds like some of them are maybe a little too comfortable. They're,
Um,
they're kind of
yeah,
a little too lax.
you can see that too. And yeah, and that's another thing that you'll see sometimes where you can get too comfortable. And it's kind of a balance. Because what I always encourage concealed carriers, again, carry as often as you can, because most people, what I'll tell new concealed carriers is, handling a loaded firearm, usually the only time you do that is on the firing line at the range. When you're a concealed carrier, you're going to be handling that loaded firearm in the morning when you get dressed, at night when you come home, in the bathroom, all around the house. So you need to handle it enough to where you're familiar with it a little bit, but then, like you're saying, you get overly familiar, and now that goes, the other way.
Yeah.
So you always have to be thinking about it. I know when I one of the things I'll catch myself doing, my typical thing is, at night, when I'm getting ready for bed, because I'll typically carry around the house depending on what I'm wearing. But what I'll do is I'll take my gun out, I'll put it in a different holster and set that on the headboard, and that's kind of how we do it. In the morning when I'm getting dressed, I take that gun out of that holster, put it in my carry holster. And sometimes now it is in the morning, you're thinking about, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got this meeting, got this thing. And I'll catch myself sometimes thinking about that stuff while I got the gun in my hand. And I'll stop myself. So wait a minute, stop, just pay attention to the gun first, put it away in the holster, and then continue what you're doing. Because like you're saying, it's real easy to goof yourself up like that. So that's kind of one of the things that I see.
Makes sense. Let's see. Gun websites asked or is asking, what percentage of CCW in California have a spouse that also carries? Is it a couple's effort or individuals from your experience?
We see couples in class from time to time. It's not that unusual. If I like, we do pretty much 3 classes a month. Probably, I bet if I said once a month, we would have a couple in there. That probably wouldn't be too far off. So that's about the ratio that I see. I know just this weekend, actually, Dave was doing a class up at the club, and a couple that I know down there were both going through the class. Um, so you do see that. I don't know if I could put a percentage on it, but that's about how often we see it. So that's about what, if out of 3 classes, that's what, 45 people. Probably a couple or two out of the 45 people. So that's about what I see.
Okay. How also from gun websites, how big an issue is the California roster of approved guns? Are people able to get suitable options in spite of it?
Yeah, and I think from what I see, it's more annoying than anything else, and especially now because they're starting to add guns to the roster. Starting to see a lot of people with the SIG, the P365. A lot of people are carrying that. Um, a lot of people carry the Glocks. I carry a Glock 19, which is on the roster. So I don't know that the roster is more of an annoying thing, I think, for concealed carriers. I think there's a lot of options. The M&P shields are on there, which people like. So I don't know that it hinders them so much. The roster definitely needs to go away. But in terms of keeping people from carrying, I don't know that that's too much of a problem. The bigger concern is SB2 in the sensitive area thing.
Yeah, the roster too is definitely been dealt slowly some death blows. There are a couple of lawsuits out there, including San Diego County Gun Owners, a part of the Rena lawsuit that's getting rid of the roster. And right now, the biggest piece of the roster that really was causing the biggest problem, the microstamp is not being enforced. The microstamp requirement's not being enforced. So, yeah, I got to say, I think the Shield, Smith and Wesson, was the biggest beneficiary of the roster because man, that was a really solid carry option that was good for most people, and it was one of the few true carry options on the roster. I mean, Glock 19 is definitely a carry option. In fact, that's what I carry. But these days people aren't happy with compact. They want subcompact, and the Shield I think is probably going to start to. I think some of these new like the 365. I think some of these new pistols that are getting onto the roster because there is no microstamp requirement currently. I think they're going to eat some of the Smith and Wesson.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're starting to see the Hellfires on there as well. So that's another new one that
yeah, Hellcat.
or the Hellcat, yeah.
Okay, let's see. Rick wants to know, hi Joe, he says, how often do you advise changing out palm pepper spray and what's the best means of disposal?
So I don't know the best means. I tell you what I do or what I've done. Um, they say they're good for 2 years. So they're cheap enough to where okay, every 2 years is not a big deal. You can pick them up off of Amazon for 15 bucks or whatever. Um, I know what I did the last time. I went up in the backyard because we have just the hills behind us. But I was curious to see if it would still spray or what it would be like. So I sprayed it out up there against the fence. Um, and it's fine. That's what I did with it. I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. It's made out of oil from cayenne peppers. So, find a spot in your yard where the dog's not going to get to it and spray it out. It's not going to hurt anything. There's no chemical or anything in there that's going to be bad for you.
Yeah, keep it away from the pugs. You don't want pugs to be
There'll be a lot of
subjected.
snorting there.
Rick also wants to know how far in advance of my renewal date do I need to make a reservation with you and Bill?
We're pretty good about doing that. The renewal dates, what do you have? You got 45 days, I think, is where they say where they'll start to accept things. We're pretty good in our classes. You could usually get into a class that month. So like we're doing, we run 3 classes a month basically. So if you were it's the beginning of August, you could probably still get into an August class right now. So it's not too bad yet. I don't know how that's going to change in January, because like I was saying earlier, we're just starting to get people are just starting to sneak in that are under that 16-hour requirement. Because what happens is, if you check the sheriff's schedule every morning, sometimes you'll see where somebody's canceled and you could sneak in there. And like I said, we're starting to see people doing that. From what I'm hearing about other instructors and stuff, I don't know how ready other instructors are yet to deal with, a whole bunch of people needing the 16-hour class. Because I think a lot of them aren't putting too much time into it yet because there's no demand yet. So I think all that's likely to change as we get near the end of the year. And the other thing that's likely to happen is with these new changes from DOJ for instructors. Like for me, for instance, I was lucky I was able to get into a post instructor class, and hopefully that will keep me qualified for next year. But I'm wondering if we're not going to lose a number of instructors, when they go through this round in October when they have to renew all that stuff. So it may get tight, near the
You're worried about a bottleneck coming up in late this year or early next year.
early next year. Could be. Yeah, it's hard to say what's going to happen, but between everything doubling, because like I was saying earlier, we were fortunate because I was able to take the material from my next steps class, combine it with some of the situational awareness pepper spray stuff, add about 45 minutes of mental health to it, and now I've got a second day. Other instructors that don't have that are going to have to come up with another 8 hours worth of material that is different from their 8 hours that they're teaching now.
Yeah.
So,
I was just in the middle of some communications with between the sheriff's office and some of the instructors, and there was just most are fairly close to being approved for their new 16-hour course or have been approved for their 16-hour course, and there was a little bit of a delay there, but it looks like it's getting resolved. But you're right. I think the potential for a bottleneck is high. So okay, cool. Well, that's those are all the questions, man. I think you did an excellent job. I appreciate everything that you do, Joe. Appreciate everything you do to support San Diego County gun owners. I love all your writing, and you can't say enough good about you. So thank you so much for taking the time to educate folks tonight.
all right, great. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Glad to do it.
All right, man. Good night, everybody. Don't forget to watch Gun Owners Radio every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. on YouTube or 1170 a.m. or check us out on whatever your podcast provider is. And thank you all for watching. See you next Monday at